Hi everyone and welcome back to the fantasyfootballfix.com YouTube channel with me, Tom Campbell. You can find me on X at UtterlyTC, and welcome back to the third in our pre-season instalments of the Elite 11 team reveals. We've got Craig joining us this week to give us his thoughts ahead of the upcoming season. So without further ado, guys, let's get right into it. Guys, welcome back to the channel, and I hope your pre-season tinkering is going well. We are here to sort you out ahead of Game Week 1. I'm so excited to say we've got Craig back for another season of fun and games, mate. It's great to have you back on the channel, man. How's it all going?
It's going great. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me back on.
Pleasure.
I'm really looking forward to this season.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if we can keep that positivity going beyond Game Week 1, mate, and hopefully avoid car crashes of any too much of a disaster. So, Craig, I've asked the other boys who've been on so far their thoughts on the game changes. So just briefly, how do you see it, mate? You in favour of this being able to accrue up to 5 transfers and the BPSs? What are your thoughts on the game changes?
Let's start with the 5 transfers.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure what I think about the 5 transfers, to be completely honest. I can see the attraction, and I think it's great that it shakes up the bag a wee bit. Any change is always good for the engaged manager. There are way more engaged managers than there used to be, but fine, bring it on. I think it's interesting. It's not really me though.
Okay.
Hanging on to transfers for too long doesn't sit with me too well. I don't know. I think I'm interested to see how these first weeks go, because if you get a great start, then it's really easy to hoard your transfers, and if you get a shit start, then of course you're going to start burning them. But there's also there's also the opportunity cost of not going for a move because you're trying to hoard the transfer for a rainy day. And I think I'm hoping that's going to bite a few people on the arse, so that I can make a few early moves and get some things going there. But in all honesty, we don't know.
No.
And it's all going to depend how your season starts. So I think it's great. It's another variable. It makes things more interesting. It's certainly, I think when you spoke to Andrew and you spoke to Mark Mansfield, that they had the same opinion, that we don't really know yet. So it's going to be great to find out.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that one. The bonus points, it makes a lot of defenders a lot less interesting than they were before. And I'm not entirely sure that's completely reflected in the prices. But fine. I mean, on the other hand, it makes a few attackers much more interesting than they already were, which I guess we'll come to when we get to my draft, or at least my thoughts on that. And then last but not least, I suppose, there's this... Well, there are two things. There's this bizarre mystery chip, which nobody seems to have any concrete idea what on earth it is. So, okay, it's the same for everybody. I guess we'll find out when it comes.
Yeah.
And then not a rule change, but a change, I suppose, to the FA Cup. Replays means that our chip strategies are going to be quite different this season. I suspect they're going to be quite different this season than they were before. So there's not the inherent risk or danger that the one squads of spunking away your bench boost in Game Week 1, or to come with a not necessarily fictive example, using your triple captain chip in Game Week 2, for example. These things are on the radar now, where they almost certainly weren't before. So I think there's lots of interesting new things this year.
Definitely. Yeah, it's exciting, right? Nice to have some sort of fresh ideas and wrinkles to try and work our way through, right? As engaged managers, that's what we like, isn't it, mate? So definitely, that's 3 for 3, guys, in the series so far. People are in favour. You've talked to me before, Craig, around sort of transfer strategy early on in the season and chasing price increases and the value of that later down the stretch. Do you think that's going to you're going to see people miss out on that, and you think you'll be able to benefit from that as people try and sort of hoard these transfers for later on?
Yeah, I mean, the pricing is much better this season than it was last season. I mean, last year there were too many giveaways. I mean, there were really only be 2, maybe 3 standout bargains this season, and I think everyone's going to have them from the start, so it's not entirely relevant. But value always comes into the equation for me, less so than when I was almost going to say when I was young, but less so than years gone past.
Yeah.
But the second thing is just, one thing is the value. The other thing is just if it becomes part of your goal to accumulate 5 free transfers, not having a particularly clear idea what it is you want to use them for, but it's just nice to have them sitting there in the bank. then I think there's quite a few points you could probably avoid picking up. And my
Interesting.
initial thought is that I don't want to get caught by that. So
Yeah.
I don't intend to hoard 5 from the start. That's my starting point.
Interesting, because I think I might be one of those guys to sort of get attracted to this this prospect of having all of these transfers there, and saving money in the bank, I guess, is the analogy I would make, and whether or not that's the right thing. It's nice to hear you sort of give a counter argument. Anyway, let's move on, Craig. So today's video, we're going to go through your draft that you've come up with, and in the same way that Andrew and Mark did, it's very much draft right now, and things are subject to change, but you do have some thoughts around price points, and we're going to go through them position by position today, guys. And then in the second part of the video, we are going to look at some expensive defensive options and get Craig's thoughts around those guys and whether or not it's worth potentially investing in them in game week 1. So let's start, Craig, with the goalkeeper. We've actually got a debate straight away here. You and I were talking off camera. We've got Miguel here in goal, but you were saying straight away that actually you're sort of 50-50 as to how to spend this money. What are your thoughts around goalkeepers right now?
I think there are a few 4.5s who are interesting. I think there's Miguel, and when I made this draft, it was based upon the premise that he would be Forest's first choice. And if he is Forest's first choice, if we get some kind of an indication before the season start, then he's going nowhere. If, however, as seems likely, it's not as cut and dried as I thought it was when I put his name on the sheet, then it would change to Henderson. But Henderson, one of the Chelsea goalkeepers, whichever the Forest goalkeeper turns out to be, I mean, in all honesty, it's a coin toss. Okay. Try again. It's a coin toss even. So I don't think. I think Henderson, if he's the one who's nailed, then he's the one to go for. But I think if Miguel was, if we had some indication that Miguel was going to be the guy, then I would become very comfortable going with him.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew talked around Nottingham Forest as well last week around how they ended the season well defensively. Nuno in charge as well, and I know there's been some talk around them defensively. So I think getting that information would be super helpful there, wouldn't it? Definitely. Just on Henderson as well, do you see him getting that spot, Craig? I mean, he had it at the end of the season when Johnson was back available. He's played a lot of preseason minutes. Do you think he's going to get the nod?
I really can't see any reason why he wouldn't. I mean, they had was it the 4th or the 5th best defending numbers in the second half of the season. He was a mainstay throughout all that. I really don't see what Johnson has in his locker to push Henderson off the number 1 spot. So I would feel fairly safe going for Henderson. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's your advice strategically. Forget the who, more around the I guess the what. 4.5, stick one and forget for the initial few game weeks is how to spend money on goalkeepers, Craig.
I don't normally spend money on goalkeepers, no. But as we're about to find out, I've spent some money elsewhere, and that kind of limits the number of more extravagant choices I can have in the team.
Beautiful segue. It's like we planned this all out. So let's move on and take a look at how some of that change is being invested. We'll move on to the defence. You can see we've got 3 there. Lots of money being spent here, Craig. Nice to see some change in tact here. So you've got Trent, a hefty chunk of change there, 7 million. You've got Gvardiol, and you've also got Muno. So you're really bullish on this Crystal Palace defence as well. So let's talk around these defensive options. And we do have on our next slide as well, guys, some more stats around these more expensive defenders. But your thoughts on defenders, Craig?
Gvardiol was the first name on my defence. He really turned my. I mean, it's not exactly database analysis, but he really turned my season around last season, and there's a bit of loyalty there for me. But I think he's head and shoulders, both in terms of numbers, but also in just terms of expectation for the start of the season. For me, he's the most reliable pick of all the, should we say, premium defenders in all the teams. He's relatively nailed. He's had a decent pre-season. He's fit. Wasn't overly strenuated at the Euros. So for me, he went straight in. If I take Munoz, he's probably the least nailed. Most definitely the least nailed of those 3, but only because of his price point. I think he's worth easily the 0.5 premium over the 4.5 players like Guehi and like Joachim Andersen and Answer and whoever else you could pick from the multitude of decent 4.5. So I think Munoz offers something a little bit extra. It's a little bit grass over data because I don't think his numbers really reflect just how far forwards he was very often in the second half of the season. But I'm willing to go with my gut on him if I can find the money. I think I can, but
yeah. Interesting one. And actually, Craig, I did some analysis today on Fantasy Football Fix, just looking at the last 5 game weeks of last season, specifically looking at defensive numbers from defensive players rather, and the creative output. And Munoz did feature highly. Yes, he was behind some of his peers who cost a little bit more money, but he was right up there. And you can do that, guys, over at Fantasy Football Fix, of course. So let's talk around Trent, though. Craig, so I mean, Liverpool do have this handsome first fixture, don't they? And a nice early run, 7 mil, a lot of money, obviously. Are you bullish on Liverpool? Are you bullish on Trent? Bullish on both? What are your thoughts?
I'm hopeful, not bullish.
Okay.
I don't think we really know enough yet about what slots Liverpool are going to be like in real life in the Premier League. I don't think these friendlies tell us too much in terms of how they're going to be in the heat of battle. But just from good old-fashioned looking at the fixtures, they're not going to get a better first 5 fixture run than they've got at the start of this season. The coach has changed, but by and large, the personnel haven't. Most people are going to be back, maybe not Darwin, but that's maybe not the end of the world, at the start of the season. So he's got a pretty strong squad to choose from. 7 million for an informed Trent is a bargain.
Oh, yeah.
The question is just, will he deliver the goods? So it's a punt. Yeah. It's an expensive punt, but I'm willing to take that risk at the start. And there's also, and the same applies for Guardiola for that matter, it's easier to downgrade than it is to upgrade. So my thought around this and the other expensive picks has been, I'd rather have them from the start and have that flexibility to jump off them rather than get caught out by not having them and not have the flexibility to get to them. So it's a bit of a, I'm not sure you can call Trent a punt with those fixtures.
A little bit.
It's, I'm hopeful more than certain that he's going to deliver.
Yeah.
And especially game week 4 and 5, that it can't get better than that, surely. So
yeah. Yeah, I think I understand why you're calling it a punt, Craig, because last season wasn't great for him, right? But short memory, isn't it? I mean, you don't have to go back too far beyond that to see some incredible numbers for Trent. So I understand that why that hope's being potentially placed there. Let's move on and take a look at the midfield. But just before we reveal your actual starting 4, I just want you to talk around Nkunku there. Sitting on the bench, obviously, super tough fixture in game week 1. Presumably that's what's led you there.
Yeah.
Are you sort of seeing Nkunku as one of those, you mentioned bargains, right?
Yes.
Craig, is he definitively one of them?
Way too cheap.
Yeah, it's mispriced.
It's way too cheap. I mean, I don't have a huge amount of expectation or confidence for Chelsea's season start. I think it looks like and feels like it's going to take Maresca a bit of a while to get them ticking. But he's going to be playing, whether it's at 9 or 10 or it's a very advanced 8, I'm not quite sure. It doesn't really seem certain from the friendlies, but he's too good a player not to be involved around the box, and he's too good a player not to be taking chances. So hopefully his fitness stays, but I just think at that price it's too much of an opportunity to pass up, despite their fixtures not being fantastic or their preseason form not being overly promising. I'm prepared to take that risk and have them from the start.
Understood. And Andrew was the same.
But not against Manchester City.
No. And I think Andrew was of a similar mind as well last week. So let's take a look at who gets the nod ahead of Nkunku in the midfield 4. So I was fascinated when I saw this, Craig, this central midfield. I guess it is not central, but the 2 central midfielders, we've got them on screen, of Rodgers, who was talked around last week, a £5 million player with it from Aston Villa. Smith Rowe. I mean, we talked last week, didn't we, guys, around Fulham's early season fixtures away at Man United. Maybe not the best, but maybe not the scariest these days either. Smith Rowe in there. Let's start there, man. What do you like about Smith Rowe there, the new signing for Fulham? Do you think this is going to be another mispriced player?
I'm not sure he's mispriced, but it's a romantic pick. I mean, he's been a
That's a
fan.
good word.
I don't
Good
know.
word. Yeah.
It's always been quite surprising for me that he never really broke through more than he did at Arsenal. He's always been easy on the eye.
Oh yeah.
He's coming to a team with great fixtures, a great coach. He should fit pretty well into the team. I assume he's going to play at 10,
10.
but we don't
Right.
know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's been on the same pitch as Pereira yet. So I guess we're going to have to hope that he plays there and not handed out on the wing. But
Yeah.
he's not nailed. But it's a romantic pick. As soon as he moved, I thought I'd like a piece of that with those fixtures, or at least a Fulham attacker. And I think him and Muniz, the striker, are the obvious
Yeah, they are.
Fulham players to go for. So he's in from the start. I'm not saying he's nailed because there are quite a number of lower priced midfielders and for that matter strikers who I'm playing with and moving around to see who would play in which week and the rest of it, and keeping an eye on I'll start keeping an eye on the preseason reports from here on in.
Yeah.
To get a feeling for how that balances out. But some combination of a Fulham attacker for the start, I would really like that. So it's really between Smith Rowe and Muniz, the striker. So right now it's on Smith Rowe. And 5.5 seems potentially a really good price.
A handsome price, it does, yeah, definitely. And this is quite thematic, isn't it? Because Andrew talked similarly, and I don't think Smith Rowe would have signed at that point when he recorded, but he was similarly positive around Fulham as an attacking sort of option for FPL managers to exploit early on in the season. We talked around Rodgers then as well. Do you think this is the best route into the Aston Villa midfield? Because there's some talk around Leon Bailey, who's a little bit more, well, quite significantly more at 6.5 million. Yeah, definitely. Do you think he represents a surefire starter for Emery there with Rodgers? I mean, it feels like there's a bit of a selection quandary there.
Yeah, there is, and it is for me. I mean, he's not nailed, but the picks I've taken necessitate me fishing in the pond for 5 and 5.5s, and he feels the pick of the 5s.
Yeah.
To me, with the exception of everybody's favourite name this last few days, Oscar Bob, and I don't profess to know a great deal about his chances whatsoever, but he seems to be picking up quite a bit of hype with the Alvarez move and playing so well in the friendlies. And he's also 5, but whether he would see me through to a wild card, less certain of that. Whereas Rodgers seems like he's going to get some minutes.
For sure, definitely.
So I feel reasonably confident, but again, there's like 3 or 4 spots which are open to being fiddled with, and he's definitely one of them.
Yeah, no,
but it looks promising so far.
It definitely does. And what was interesting, the guys so far that have been on the series have had something in that £5 million midfield range. I know we had Ahmad being discussed last week. We've now had Rodgers, obviously Smith Rowe a little bit more at 5.5. In terms of the more expensive options, Eze you've included as well. Do you think there's going to be any kind of drop-off for Crystal Palace? Obviously, Elise moving on, and they were incredible at the end of last season, weren't they? They really were fantastic. Do you think Eze is just going to continue and take that talisman mantle on even further now, Craig? Is that the thought there?
If he stays.
Yeah, that's kind of a big thing, yeah.
And that's kind of my big question mark about Eze, because, I mean, to answer your question, that yes, I think, he very clearly becomes the talisman. He very definitely would have penalties, I assume, with Elise gone. So he's a great pick if he stays. If he leaves to, one would assume, Manchester City, then he becomes a significantly less interesting pick, I think, at the start, because nobody walks into Pep's team. So he would be one for later with a wild card, I think. But as it is right now, then Eze is a lovely choice at 7 million. But again, I mean, there are so many options around that price point. I mean, if we knew Jota was nailed as the number 9 at Liverpool, then I think you've got to say with those fixtures that for 0.5 more, Jota would trump Eze as a choice there. Ismail Sarr, I'm really looking forward to seeing play for Palace. I have great memories of him from previous FPL seasons, and he's only 6, so it's a nice saving there. So he's certainly in for now if he stays at Crystal Palace.
I think your point around
no question.
Yeah, I think your point around penalties is probably massive, actually, Craig. If you consider the cohort there of 7.5 million, sort of Jared Bowen maybe, and Anthony Gordon maybe at Newcastle.
Yeah.
Great options, aren't they, for their respective teams? But they're 0.5 more, and neither of them you would think would have penalties either. So I do think that's something worth considering. Mo Salah probably doesn't need a lot of talk around. Obviously, 200 plus points every season he plays. Nice to see him in the team. Craig, was there ever a doubt? Were you always going to say, you know what, he's finding his way into my team, irrespective of the manager change, the price point, etc., and you've not deviated from that, or is there some doubt around the Egyptian king?
Not really, not with those fixtures. He looks absolutely rocking. If his physical conditions and his sign of how he's feeling about the game, then he looks to be well up for it. I'm more than happy to have a piece of that. So I mean, when the prizes were announced, the first thing I did was a draft with Salah, I think Isaac, Guardiola, Salah, and Haaland, and then worked around from there. And Trent wasn't in from the start, and then I found a way to squeeze Trent in. But I mean, from the start, Salah's been in with those fixtures. I'm just not turning down. But those fixtures for Liverpool, it's just too interesting.
Okay. Fair enough, mate.
With Salah, and we don't know quite how Slot's going to use. You know, in the heat of battle, Salah, but he's not going to have him very far from the box.
No, of course not.
So you know, he's not stupid. So he's still going to get chances. Which chances? Well, we're going to find out. But I still trust him to put them away when he gets them. So now he's not in doubt. He's going nowhere.
And trust him, you do, because you've got the armband on him as well. So that's nice to see as well. Let's move on, mate. Let's take a look at these strikers. Then your front three shapes up with Haaland, which probably don't need to belabor the point there. I mean, he's scoring loads of goals in pre-season. He's an absolute beast, isn't he? So let's not start there. Let's start with Isak there as well. So the one Newcastle player that you've opted for there, he feels like in every draft I see, Isak is in. Is he another one of those ones that you just say, actually, that it makes too much sense to include, and this is just a bit of a no-brainer?
Yeah, no, I think he's $1 million too cheap. I was really, really surprised with $8 million. So. And even if he was $1 million more, I think I've still been finding a way to get him in with the start for the half of the season. And he's there full pre-season, and he's fit, and they have no European games to bother them down the line. So
that's a good point.
I think it's he was absolutely a no-brainer for me. No issue whatsoever. Enough.
And so João Pedro, obviously, when the prices were announced, and I think it was Andrew, or maybe been Mark as well, talked around the price being like really attractive, and then we talked around the fixtures. You're a fixtures guy, Craig. They put me off, right? And I have to be honest. Talk to me why he's in your team. How does João Pedro find his way into this team?
He's a wee bit too cheap. That's the first point. Point two, I haven't got lots of money, so it's him or a six. And third, despite the fixtures not being great, I think Brighton are going to create chances come what may with the way their new manager plays football. And fourth, he's on pens. So having said that, he's not nailed in my squad.
Right.
So there could be a shuffle. I mean, he could shuffle to Muniz, and then I wouldn't take two Fulham attackers, and then Smith Rowe would have to become someone else. But that would necessitate, if I do that, then we start saying goodbye to Munoz in defence and bringing in a 4.5 to raise the extra 0.5. So that kind of relationship between Munoz and the midfielders and the single cheap striker spot isn't nailed down yet. So there's an interrelationship between whether I can afford that 5 million or that 0.5 extra for Munoz in defence if I have Muniz in the attack from Fulham. So I'm nowhere near decided on that. But as it is right now, that 0.5 saving goes a long way, I think. And I think that while Muniz from Fulham is probably the better choice, that 0.5 opens up a few options from going for João Pedro. And I think he'll get chances.
Yeah,
it sounds like he's going to be fit for the season start. So, yeah.
I mean, we talked at the beginning of the video, Craig, around Forest and liking them as well. Chris Wood's found his way into a lot of drafts as well. Do you think the 0.5 is enough in of itself, or do you actually think even if there was parity in the prices, João Pedro is a better pick, full stop? What's your opinion on Chris Wood as an option in the front three?
I think you answered my question. I think João Pedro is a better pick, full stop. Okay. I think if Chris Wood Chris Wood can have days where he shanks it at the stadium. Chance after chance after chance. And if he does that, he's out the team the next week because they have options. I don't think the same thing happens with João Pedro. And I don't think the same thing happens for Muniz from Fulham. So I just don't see, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's just me being prejudiced and whatever it is, but I just don't have that same feel for Chris Wood being nailed on as the other two. And there aren't that many, let's be honest, at this price point who we're really choosing between. So for me, it's between Muniz and João Pedro, and that 0.5 goes just far enough for now.
I like it. And to be fair,
But
the
it
other
could
guys.
be.
Sorry, Craig. No, you go, mate.
No, I was just going to say. I mean, the option would be to swap. What's his name? The one who came from Newcastle, Minter, into the midfield and bring Muniz into the front. But I honestly haven't seen anything or read anything about Brighton in their preseason side. I couldn't tell you the first thing. I haven't got that far with my research yet. So, but it's an option. But I'm open. And the thing is, we've got the Charity Shield in. It's this coming weekend, right?
This weekend,
I mean,
that's right.
Every single season I've been playing FPL, my head changes along with most other people's head changes after the Charity Shield. Something happens to change the whole zeitgeist of the last week before the game starts. So I really don't imagine it's going to be so different this year. So I'm just keeping my cool for now and assuming I'm going to have a few new thoughts come the weekend, and then there'll be those last few days of panic before the deadline, and
that's why we love it, man. Definitely, and then that's what happens every season. I think the observation I made on Forest was that they set up really defensively soundly, didn't they, at the end of the season? But historically, Nuno not a manager who leads his team to heaps of chances, right? So you'd probably tend to favour them defensively rather than offensively as a more sort of team metric wise.
Well. Yeah, I'm saying that I'm not opposed to a Hudson-Odoi. I'm not opposed to Gibbs White. It is genuinely something completely irrational and probably unfounded statistically that I have against Chris Wood. But you're completely right. Nuno is never going to be the 3-0 guy, right?
No.
There is that. Yeah.
Right. Just before we move on and look at these expensive defenders, Craig, one final thing. No Arsenal players here, right? Not the first draft that I've seen that being the case for. I think most people see them continuing title challenging type season. They did last season. They did this, they are consistently up there. Why can't any of us find a way to get these players into our team, mate? What's putting us off? Is it fixtures? Is it prices? Is it both? What's going on?
It's not the prices. I think the prices are fair enough. I don't think that Saliba, well, apart from Ben White, I can't quite get my head around. But it's a strange price point. I mean, is Ben White worth 0.5 more than Guardiola? Nah, no, he's not. To start off with, there's that slight uncertainty about who's going to play. I mean, it seems. I mean, they've strengthened in defence. Great. And Timber is back. We don't quite know where, or at least I don't, as I say, quite know where he's going to fit in. It seems a bit bizarre because that was probably pound for pound one of the best defences in Europe last season. So it's a little bit strange to be fiddling too much with it. So I suspect he won't from the get-go, but it's just putting me off a little bit. The fixtures aren't great. I can't see me holding on to my wild card that long. So there's always the chance when their fixtures turn that I've got them in for their better fixtures going forwards when we also have a better idea about the defence. As for the midfield, I think Ulegor and Saka are both priced really, really well. I've got no problem with their pricing whatsoever. Havertz is equally, I think it's a little bit fixture flow dependent, but I can easily see myself having Havertz at some or several points during the season, just not now. I think there are better picks for the season start, especially in my case when I've gone a little bit balls deep on the expensive guys. So I really haven't got any way to bring any of. Well, I could bring one of them in for Trent or Guardiola, but at the start of the season, they're not even competing. It's just for me, it's black and white, clear as day that Trent and Guardiola are better picks than Gabriel and Saliba for the start.
Yeah, understood. Good answer, mate. Yeah, definitely, and I suspect they'll feature in your team down further on, but probably not too far into the season at all. I know you're a huge fan of Erdegaard. Anyway, look, this is how Craig's draft is shaping up, guys. So do get into the comments and let him know your thoughts around that. And we'll move on now and take a little look at some of these expensive defenders and give you some statistics around them. Okay, guys, so here we go. We've got Trent Alexander-Arnold, we've got Gvardiol and Pedro Porro, not a name that we've discussed so far. But just before we get into that, I do want to remind you to head over to fantasyfootballfix.com if you haven't already. And you can, of course, subscribe, get your push notifications enabled, and you can follow the thoughts of Craig, of Andrew, of Mark, and the other elite managers as they tinker and refine their teams ahead of Game Week 1. So do head over to fantasyfootballfix.com and subscribe if you haven't already done so. But Craig, we've got highly owned defenders here, and I guess it's not highly owned, but it's also highly priced. So 3 handsome price points here. 7 million for Trent, we sort of talked around him, and Gvardiol at 6 as well, and Pedro Porro. A lot of green for Pedro Porro on here, so he's quite well fancied by the fixed kind of algorithm projections. Just talk to me around these 3 guys and your thoughts around investing significant money in the defence for Game Week 1. What are you seeing here from a defensive investment perspective?
Well, let's start with the first 2. I mean,
yeah.
If let's take a step back, because what we have on the screen is points and games and assists, and especially bonus points from last year. And if anybody has several hours to spare, I would suggest they go over and listen to Above Average's guide to the bonus points for defenders podcast. They made a few weeks ago. That was quite intense and interesting to find out what the changes were there, because I really don't see any chance of Pedro Porro getting anywhere near as many bonus points this season as he got in last season. It's just it would require something quite extraordinary to happen to the defence for him to keep getting clean sheets, which they didn't before, and the attacking returns. I wasn't a particularly lucky owner of Porro last season. That might also cloud my judgment a little bit. I seem to have him in his shallow spells compared to his other ones. But I really appreciate that in the fix algorithm, in the other popular algorithm that starts with R, he also figures quite highly. Fix is better. But
well remembered.
I'm just not buying it, in all honesty. To be honest, and that's a criticism of all the models right now, when I look at some of the usual places people go to this season for the points projections, I haven't looked at them that closely because I took a quick look and I wasn't buying it. Do you know what I mean? It felt like years gone by where it's just like, nah, I'm going to trust my instincts a wee bit here. And I don't trust my instincts on Porro and Spurs to be keeping clean sheets. If they're not keeping clean sheets, he's not going to get the bonus unless he's really, really hammering the attacking returns. But the way the bonus have changed, I don't see him any longer being as interesting an option. I appreciate this is not a universally held view, and I'm not backing it up with a huge number of statistics. But for me, he's not interesting. Gvardiol, on the other hand, I mean, whether it's from his positioning and his heat map and the kind of balls he's getting in and around and playing in and around the box, the defensive solidity of Manchester City compared to Spurs, especially. Okay, they're not quite Arsenal, but he's delivering something that Ben White can't quite for 0.5 less. And he's pretty much nailed, and their fixtures are great, and he's fit as a fiddle. So from the start of the season, I see him as absolutely an interesting choice. Trent, as I said before, I think for me, he feels a bit more of a hopeful choice because of, we're hoping for the glories of days gone past. If you were going on last season's data, then the interesting one would, or at least at the second half of last season, the interesting choice or the fourth column would have been Robertson, because I think Robertson probably ran him really close, if not pipped him on data for the second half of last season. But there's a big doubt about him being fit for the start of the season. So he's, he hasn't been in my consideration for that long. But Trent, we're hoping for the glories of days gone past, and if he gets close to that with those fixtures, then for me he's standout choice for this season. At least with those those first 5 fixtures, especially 4 and 5, which could be an absolute bloodbath, frankly.
Yeah, I mean we've only put the first 4 up on this particular graphic, but
true.
But you're right. It carries on, doesn't it? I think a question for you on Trent. Then you may have already answered this a little bit as well. But do you think Trent at 7 is the better pick over Diogo Jota, knowing what we know, and I guess not knowing what we don't know? in terms of
Yeah,
security of
yeah.
selection. Do you think he's worth it, or he's the better option of the two?
I mean, he is right now because he's absolutely. I mean, I really can't, unless he moves him into the six, and I think he'd be unwise to do so.
Feels unlikely, right? Yeah.
So he feels pretty nailed as a right back who's going to invert. That seems absolutely clear. So there's no one challenging him. You cannot say the same about Jota. We really have no idea yet whether it's going to be Jota as the 9, whether it's going to be suddenly mine's gone blank.
Darwin, Gakpo, yeah.
Gakpo, that's the chap. And then, of course, there's Darwin whenever he returns to fitness. And that could easily rotate based upon the circumstances, and they do have Europe. They're in Europe, aren't they, this season? So at some point, pretty soon, they're also going to have rotation issues. So, excuse me, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, they do have European football. Yeah.
No, I mean, it would need, for me, I think it would need, someone to say Darwin isn't going to be ready until September, or something like that for me to go for Jota, or Darwin, has broken his leg falling down the stairs or something. Boom, then I would start looking at Jota seriously. But Trent doesn't have that issue. Trent's just going to play, boom, every single goddamn week, and I'd like a piece of that when those fixtures are that green. It's
I understand that.
It's a chance, but yeah.
I understand it, mate. It's nice to have that contrary view. I guess Andrew last week was really pushing the Jota selection, although he did caveat it by saying he wanted more information and more clarity ahead of committing to that ahead of game week 1. But nice to hear an argument for another Liverpool option. I guess final question for today's video, Craig. You're suggesting here it's sensible to put a fair amount of money into defence despite the bonus point changes. Is that right? Is that strategically how you see that? You think there's enough value there to say, even with the BPS changes that the podcast you mentioned referred to, there's still serious value there?
There is for a handful. I mean, you can count on one hand. You can count quite frankly on 3 or 4 fingers the number of players we're really talking about who are interesting. And it goes hand in hand with them having fixtures sent from the gods. And the fact that I really do not imagine me being in possession of my first wild card after game week 6. It would take the mother of all starts for me not to use my wild card, and that's 15 years of FPL experience saying that I know myself far too well. It's not data based, it's not rational, it's not logical, it's
Craig based.
So I really don't see myself having this problem. It'd be an entirely different discussion after 5 weeks, and the structure will probably be a bit more classical when I do wildcard, a little bit more price point based than it is right now. So this is just a roll. It's not a roll of the dice. These are good picks, but it's a wee bit punty at the start of the season, going so heavy on so many expensive players for sure. I wouldn't normally do that, but
you can reset the deck a few game weeks in, and what you've just said is you know yourself well enough to know that you'll probably be doing that quite early on, and hopefully I'll get you on a video shortly before or shortly after, or maybe both, to talk around that. Mate, it's been a pleasure. I absolutely love talking FPL with you. I'm sure all of the viewers have enjoyed having you back on as well. Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I don't actually. I always never prepare for that question. I don't. I'm playing. I still haven't. There was one of our colleagues from the Elite 11, James Cooper, who needs to drag his arse onto this video, by the way, pretty soon.
That'd be nice.
Pull his finger out and do something. He had the. I've always for years and years wanted to do a game week 1 bench boost.
Okay. And, any interest this season?
I looked at it and thought no, but he came up with a not entirely terrible bench boost 1 draft this afternoon with the idea of then wildcarding out of it in game week 2. I think you should get him on next week and get him to justify that selection he was going for. It wasn't a bad idea at all. But and me personally, I'm sniffing around a triple captain Haaland pretty early in the season. Against Ipswich maybe. So that's my. I think there were some new opportunities this season which we shouldn't be ruling out so quickly, and assuming that this season will be like others. It's not going to be like others because the FA Cup changing. So
I love it.
A little bit creatively.
I'll try and get Mr. Cooper on. see if I can persuade him. And love that. Final thoughts. You've mentioned 3 chips in the space of about 15 seconds. So good thoughts to wrap things up, mate. And look, thank you so much for coming back on. I'm really excited to see how another season plays out for you, mate. We'll get you on throughout the season. Guys, do please smash a like on the video for Craig. Do let us know in the comments down below what you think of his selections. And if you've got any other comments or questions, I'm sure Craig will come back to you as well. And guys, I'll be back next week with the final video ahead of Game Week 1. Can't believe it. We've almost made it, guys. So do enjoy your tinkering. Do head over to fantasyfootballfix.com if you haven't already. Do subscribe to our channel here on YouTube as well to stick around and watch Eddie and Callum's videos as they continue throughout the preseason. But guys, I will see you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.